어서오세요. 같이 봅시다.
Our director of the FBI, to be inquiring into this, and we also agree with and apply President Trump's executive order calling for.
여러분, 제가 이것 때문에 잠도 포기했습니다 오늘. 그만큼 이게 중요한 거.
Also must care about what is happening in the world, and even more so when there is a connection between the U.S. government and what is happening. Such a link exists where you have a web in South Korea
A웹 남한 109개 국가에 개입을 했다. 그리고 그 나라들의 그 부정선거를 저질렀다. 그래서 이거는 단순히 미국 이슈가 아니다. 이건 전 세계적 일이기 때문에 미국의 개입이 필요하다. 그럼 그 숫자 너무 많아서 모든 나라 샘플을 구하기 어렵지만 예를 들면 콩고, 이라크, 키르기스탄, 에콰도르 수많은 대륙들. 근데 특징이 그런 국가들의 USAID 돈이 다 스며들어 들어갔다. 그리고 그 돈이 들어간 곳에 전부 부정선거가 일어났다. 그리고 그렇게 탄생한 사람들은 전부 독재자들인데 그 이유는 그 민주적이지 않아도 힘이 유지되기 때문이다. 그리고 그 중심에는 대한민국 선관위가 있다. 슬프게도 진실로부터 멀지 않다? 뭐가? 어서오세요. 지금 한 마리 대충 요약하면 진실하면 숨길 필요가 없다. 근데 막 숨긴다. 이런.
Then you have a situation where you can see free, fair, transparent elections.
그 연준 잠시만요. 좀 집중하고 있습니다.
And with respect to this National Election Commission, and you will get some sense of this through the videos that will be shown, you will see fraudulent operations that take place on the.
네 맞아요. 실시간입니다, 돌고래님. 어서 오세요.
You have electronic fraud that happens algorithmically. And then you have an attempt to make the paper ballots catch up to the manipulated electronic voting. If I were to break it down and summarize it very simply and
여러분들 이 단어가 고도화돼서 통역은 어렵겠습니다. 저는 알아들었더라도.
it mainly happens during the early voting period, where they have a different set of rules for early voting. You don't have to even vote in your district. You don't even need proper ID.
지금 얼마나 선거제도가 엉터리인지 설명 중이에요. 그냥 대략 내용이 대략 어떻게 되는지만 말씀드릴게요, 여러분한테. 분명 이 과정에서 검증이 필요한데 검증을 똑바로 안 한다. 그리고 부방대 막 방해했다 이거예요.
This is the sort of thing that was happening in this last election. And two videos that we'd like to show you to set the stage a bit more. One was shown in Times Square in New York recently.
하나는
It's just a 2-minute video.
그래서 이를 폭로하는 영상을 하나는 타임스퀘어, 뉴욕 타임스퀘어에서 뭐 보여줬다.
Some of what I'm alluding to here. So without further
그리고 다시 한번 틀 예정인데 여기서 보여줄 예정이다.
allow people to
대충 그런 얘기.
see the sorts of things that are happening.
여러분 그 화질 다운 시키겠습니다. 화질 풀로 하니까 못 따라오네. 그리고 사실 미국이 인터넷이 이렇게 구려요. 데이터도 잘 안 터지고. 그 문제가 여기서 늘어나네. 예, 여러분 이걸 위해서 저희는 밤을 샜습니다. 그럼요. 그 미정경에 잡혀 올려주시면 땡큐죠 저야. 근데 뭐 애초에 박주현 변호사 TV에서 현장에서 촬영하고 계신 거라?
Please bear with us as we get it going.
아니다. 그 줌인으로 그냥 크게 보여드릴게요. 잠시만요. 이게요, 컴퓨터에서 풀로 보여드리고 싶었는데, 그러려면 엑스플릿 유료 결제를 해야 됩니다.
China, we've actually put a lot of personnel to conduct the election. This was just crazy. It's really led by China.
처음부터.
우리는 키우고
저기서도 진행은 좀 느리구나. 여러분들 어서오세요. 반갑습니다.
China, we've actually put a lot of personnel to conduct the election. This was just crazy. It's really led by China, this Chinese Communist Party, through this election.
대해서 알면 알수록 완전히 내부 통제 없이 스스로 정말 썩어가고 있는 거예요. 그게 제일 큰 문제라고 생각합니다.
상관이나 부정 체력 비리가 878건 나오잖아요. 무슨 놈의 비리가 그렇게 많아요?
신이 있어가지고 그 선거 결과를 다 이렇게 만들어 놓은 것처럼 그렇게 보는 거예요, 이 결과가.
이전에
제?
중국에서 준비해서 한국으로 많이 뗀 것으로
동일한 투표율도 들어갔습니다. 집중을 들으시면
자들이 학술적으로 조작 공식을 찾아내면 조작을 입증할 수 있다는 겁니다.
그 실수를 이게 조직적이에요. 있을 수 없는 거예요.
결과가 바뀌어버린 거죠.
The following are the scenarios of election fraud that ordinary Korean people.
Hi, my friends in America. Do you remember what happened to the President Trump in a 2020 election? Many people said it was not fair. Some votes came from dead people. Some machines changed votes. Some people voted more than once. And people were not allowed to watch the counting closely. That is not fair. That's not freedom.
And we were getting ready for a big celebration. We were winning everything, and all of a sudden it was just all off.
The Trump campaign has 234 pages of sworn affidavits from witnesses alleging vote fraud.
FBI Director Kash Patel has handed Congress internal documents alleging Chinese operatives tried to interfere in the 2020 election by mass producing fake U.S. driver's licenses.
As 9 a.m. this morning, Kash Patel released evidence of mass voter fraud to steal the 2020 election. The moment we've all been waiting for is happening right freaking now.
But guess what? It's not just America. This is happening in many countries now. In Canada, in Australia, in Africa, even in the UK. Fake elections are happening everywhere. And now, it happened in my country, South Korea. Introducing Korea's election fraud. June 3rd, 2025. On June 3rd, 2025, we had a big election, but something was very wrong. It was not a real vote. It was fake. It was a lie. That's why I made this video. I want you to see it. I want the world to see it. Let's ask a simple question. Please think about this. When we vote, we fold the papers and put it in a box. So why are the papers so flat and stiff? Not folded at all. One person votes one paper. Then why are many papers stuck together?
그니까요, 돌고래님.
저희 될것 같은 건데 증거 촬영만 하겠습니다. 잠시만요. 이거 좀 공태기로 썼나요? 공태기로 들어있었나요? 그렇게 몇 개가 들어갔을 때 주장식 겹쳐서 아까 진짜 그런 거죠? 문제가 나중에 이게 한쪽에서는 더 특이한 문제를 잡았는데 그냥 넘어가 있다 하는데 사람들만 안 돼.
printed by a copy machine? Why are they the same? Why are there so many?
그러게 말입니다. 아, 빅텐트님 이거 박주현 변호사 유튜브 채널 킨 겁니다. 여긴 제 방이에요. 네, 맞습니다. 미국 의회입니다. 코키님 번역 처음에 해보려고 했는데 뭐라지 어려운 용어들이 많이 나와가지고 예 듣고 이해하는 것까진 가능한데 자 통역까지 하긴 어렵습니다. 죄송합니다. 제 통역까지 할 실력 안 돼요.
Some people open and close the seals again and again. Isn't that illegal? Some people bring strange papers like the flat ones from the weird places. Who are they? During the counting, the strange boxes come in. What's in them? We have the video, we have the pictures, we have the truth. But when we ask questions, people say we are the crazy ones. Why? Freedom is in danger. My country, South Korea, is in danger. Freedom is in danger. China's communist power is getting inside. They want to control us. They don't want people to choose. They want to decide for us. This is not just about Korea. This is about the world. It's about your country too. It's about freedom for everyone. Spread this video. Please share this video. Please help people to see the truth. If you love freedom, if you love Korea, if you love your country, help us tell the world. Korean president election was not a real election. Thank you.
So to provide some further context with respect to what you just saw,
아, 그쵸, 유님.
when
전부 다 참석은 못하죠.
they were given a single ballot,
미국 국내 문제도 산재인데.
a single ballot that they are required by law to hold. And then when it goes into the ballot place, they're falling on top of each other and they don't get flatter the longer they're there.
그 투표함에 투표지가 들어가는 순간 절대 그 빳빳해질 수가 없다. 뭐 대충 이런 얘기하고 있습니다.
So then, what are these flat ballots that are pristinely stacked on top of each other? They are manufactured, pre-printed ballots that are fraudulent. The ones that are stuck together also indicate that that was not a proper ballot.
그런데 빳빳한 이유는 지들이 미리 뭐 표를 뽑아놨기 때문입니다.
That are used. Now, the NEC, I think were so embarrassed by this that they took it down, but at one point they were trying to defend the pristine flat ballots by saying this is special paper that magically, after it's folded, springs back into place. That's what they said. Well, this
성관이야 말하기 적어도 형상 기억종이라 펴질 수 있다.
they took it down from their own site as an explanation because have you ever seen such paper? Have you ever heard of such paper?
여러분 그런 종이 들어본 적 있느냐?
If so, we would expect that that person should have a patent and originate money from the patent. But no such patent exists, and this is not magical paper that springs back into place and is suddenly flat and pristine. But, you know, really the paper ballots are really trying to mask the that's the part of it. If they were not, if they were confident about what they were doing, they would open up their server and allow anyone to freely see. So many people now in Korea don't trust the election commission nor the results of the election.
그럼에도 사람들이 부정선거를 안 믿는다라고 설명하고 있는 중이에요. 잠깐만요. 이거는 나만 멈춘 게 아닌가? 할 수 없지. 허허, 이 50명 이상이 보고 계신데.
And the North Korean cyber army.
아, 휴님. 아무래도 와이파이가 좀 약한가 봐요.
They attack.
잠시만요, 여러분. 오씨. 아, 예, 루스님, 지금 들어간 게 애초에 박주현 변호사님 채널이고요. 아무래도 제 집에 있는 와이파이가 문제인 것 같아요, 이건. 아,
And treaties. This is a treaty.
됐다.
Therefore, the U.S. is legally bound to come to South Korea's aid and work together to turn back these cyber attacks. This is a critical point that the U.S. has this treaty obligation. And with that, I want to pass it on to my colleagues. First, Colonel John Mills, who was the Director of Cyber Policy.
지금 존 밀스한테 넘긴다, 이런 식으로? 왜 그러냐.
In the
원래 어이가 없던 나라죠, 연주님.
U.S. Pentagon, and he has been on multiple election monitoring teams. Colonel Mills will have some very important things to share with you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you. This is a
네,
very
맞습니다.
important topic. Elections are the hard. We're dealing with an international election cartel that is essentially, this is not just affecting South Korea, it's affecting America. It's facing all.
이것은 한국만의 문제 아니다. 이건 미국도 영향이 끼치는 문제다.
In Bosnia, it was much simpler. In 2006 in Iraq, and again much simpler, but it began to be affected by the U.S. Helping Americans Vote Act in 2002. Apparently, Americans were unable to vote before 2002, so we had to have a piece of legislation called the Helping Americans Vote Act. From that point onward, everything went downhill, and it's affected worldwide, the worldwide vote. But also I've been a court-appointed election officer and given testimony in federal cases, election cases. But in dirty counties in Virginia, I've been appointed as an election officer because of dirty counties in Virginia. But the model is really Taiwan. I covered the 2000 January 2024 election in Taiwan. That is the model for a fair and clean election. Day of, one day, paper ballots, you must show ID. Everything is hand counted in front of everybody. And nothing enters any kind of electronic network until above the county level. Taiwan has 22 counties. But once it gets above the county level, that's when it gets the computer networks. But everybody knows the count by that time. There's no debate. It's been publicly counted. Everybody knows what it is. What is going on when elections are overly complex, like South Korea, like America, that is a red flag for fraud. And I always just point to the Carter Center for Democracy, which used to be the gold standard for elections and election conduct. They seem to be uninterested when it doesn't go to a certain direction. But that is overly complex. There's no reason for this complex IT. No reason. It's dangerous. It's a danger. It's dangerous. I just point to Kill Chain. What happened right before the 2020 election? The movie Kill Chain, where a lot of leading Democrats said election machines are dangerous to the foundation of the United States. Interesting. Okay. This is a national security issue. It's a national security issue in South Korea. This was a stolen election. It's also in America. And there's a direct connection. I want to also bring up our good friend, the Filipinos, because in 2024, the Filipino Attorney General went to the previous Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and said, hey, you have an election machine company bribing Filipino officials to use that company. I'm not going to name the company name. That's an American company. That's an American CEO. That's a violation of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And American Attorney General Merrick Garland, what are you going to do about it? Well, it put Merrick Garland in a very awkward situation. That same company, that CEO, is on trial right now. So we'll see the outcome, innocent until proven guilty. But that same company has hardware and software components in the South Korean election system. That same company. Isn't that interesting? But there's a direct tie-in here. So we thank our Filipino friends because they brought a huge case. Oh, and that same company, they had sued a number of media firms, I know this personally, from the 2020 election. Almost all those cases for that election machine company went away. Once the Filipinos complained to Attorney General Merrick Garland, and charges were brought up against that CEO and the American Election Machine Company. So direct ties to what happened in 2020, as FBI Director Cash Patel has pointed out. We had the FBI essentially suppressing evidence of the fake IDs made under Chinese supervision in South Korea, in Hong Kong, in the UK, and flown from Korea to Arizona. Ladies and gentlemen, this is international. This is a cartel. This is a cartel that is upsetting and throwing elections around the world. South Korea is merely the most recent case. I also want to point, we've identified Wang Huning, who's a very senior member of the Chinese Communist Party, who apparently was the quarterback and director of the whole Chinese influence campaign inside of South Korea. So we have a senior Chinese Communist Party official, essentially the quarterback. This is why South Korea had agreements with Communist China for police interchange. That's why you had this sudden, unexplained presence of Chinese police in South Korea. In the world, we have Chinese police in South Korea. It's crazy. You had all these government officials that
네, 그리고 중국 경찰이 한국에서 그 한국 경찰 노릇했다. 그래 방금 언급했습니다. 좀 있어가. 고사님.
is America's closest ally and partner. Closer than any. Five Eyes, the UK, South Korea is America's closest friend and partner. And this is crazy what is going on in South Korea. So President Trump has an election executive order. Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has given guidance on what they are going to look into on election fraud. This was even before the South Korean election. FBI Director Cash Patel has identified the fraud that was suppressed. So I think we now have the legal basis for both federal law enforcement and U.S. federal intelligence looking into these matters in South Korea, in addition to the treaty obligations on cyber that the ambassador mentioned here. This is very important. These are triggering events. So this election in South Korea is not over. It is the right of a citizen in a constitutional republic to ask questions. Anytime that is suppressed, that is wrong. And I will want to point out this absolutely bizarre National Election Commission, which apparently in South Korea, we don't even have an equivalent in America. The National Election Commission in South Korea cannot be questioned by anybody, not even the government of South Korea. Candidates sign a pledge they will never challenge anything that the National Election Commission does or says in South Korea. That is a super national body that cannot be challenged. I guess the National Election Commission is the government of South Korea. This is wrong. This is wrong. We don't know who these people are. South Koreans don't know who these people are. And yet, South Korean government can be investigated. South Korean government officials can be investigated. But nobody can challenge this body called the National Election Commission. It actually goes back a number of years, basically about 1960 in South Korea. A lot of questions. But we can never have a constitutional republic and have an entity like the National Election Commission. We no longer have a constitutional republic. Thank you. Pleased to be able to report. It's very good. Please, Section 2.3 lists a number of elements of what we consider to be the fraud, and also the first addendum in there, electionfraud.com, very well documents what happened in South Korea. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Mills. Next we'll have Dr. Brad Thayer, who has his PhD from the University of Chicago with fellowships at Harvard and then Oxford as well. A very exquisite scholar, if I may say so, and one who I think can also speak well into this issue, especially of transparency.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Tan. Great pleasure to be here to join my esteemed colleagues today. My focus is going to be on the lack of transparency in the election that we had in South Korea on June 3rd, with early voting on May 29th and May 30th, the week before. In every democracy, the social contract is made between citizens and government, and that depends upon open, honest, and transparent elections. It's essential for stable democratic government, and as Ambassador Tan mentioned, this is a problem in many democratic states, including the United States, but was particularly acute in South Korea on June 3rd and its aftermath. And this is particularly essential for key allies of the United States, like South Korea. Last week was the 75th anniversary of the commencement of the Korean War. That was a war in which over 1 million Koreans, South Koreans, military and civilian, were killed and wounded, and a war in which over 130,000 Americans were either killed or wounded. So at this time of solemn reflection of the sacrifices made by the South Korean and by the American people, it's important to consider the event of the South Korean election, to consider the Chinese Communist Party's actions and interference in that election, and the behavior of the South Korean National Election Commission. As my colleague, Colonel John Mills, just mentioned, the NAC is not transparent. Its problems are profound, and its behavior de facto breaks the social contract between the people of South Korea and their government. The NAC is not transparent in any respect, nor is it accountable to the South Korean government. It will not permit audits of their servers. It will not permit auditing of their software, of its processes, and of its computer equipment. In early voting, as mentioned and as seen in the video, and that will be discussed in a moment by our South Korean colleagues, in early voting there were many irregularities. My colleagues have mentioned some of them, and again my South Korean colleagues will also address these. But in early voting as well as the voting on June 3rd, there was evidence of double voting, evidence of proxy voting. There were abnormal ballot papers, as the video showed in some detail. There was mismanagement of ballot boxes. There were irregularities in the vote counting process. And there were anomalies in overseas voting as well. It's a long list, essentially, of major problems in this election. The gross irregularities in voting and in early voting on election day by themselves compel us to acknowledge that the election was a fraudulent one. An investigative agency must investigate the NEC, their servers, their computer equipment, and their processes. And I have to say that this is a pattern of behavior, bad behavior by the NEC, which is witnessed, of course, previously in 2020, in 2022, and 2024, and earlier South Korean elections. So, in conclusion, transparency is essential for legitimate democratic government and for the social contract that exists between all citizens of a democratic state and their government. And so it's very important for an investigative body to examine these issues, and for the NEC and for the South Korean government to provide full cooperation to address this issue. Pillar, of course, of democracy is that we must be confident of one person and one vote in any election, and the custody of that vote, of course, is going to be executed and sustained with fidelity and with the understanding that that will be a transparent process from beginning to end. The South Korean election on June 3rd failed in every account with respect to fundamental tenets of democratic vote and democratic processes. And therefore, we called in the report, again, as my colleagues have mentioned, the election was illegitimate. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
We'll continue on with Colonel Grant Newsham, attorney and author.
Grant Newsham
who has
나온다.
edited multiple volumes regarding Korean election fraud and has been on this issue for half a decade. He also wrote a book that is educating many of us called When China Attacks as well. I would commend that too. But Colonel and attorney and author Grant Newsham has some valuable insights for us as well.
Thank you, Morris. I appreciate that. I'll just get going right away. This team looked into the 2025 elections in South Korea. I actually got my start in 2020, looking into the National Assembly elections there. And then looked into the 2022 presidential election, 2024.
브랜드 뉴섬이 2020 그 4.15 총선도 살펴봤다고
When I first
하더라고.
went in 2020, I didn't expect to find anything. I just wanted a trip to South Korea. I'm half joking. But I didn't think there'd be anything. Elections turn out in ways you often don't expect, but in very short order, I realized that something was wrong. And it was probably the biggest surprise of my professional life, short of the Washington football team never winning a Super Bowl in 35 years. But really the biggest surprise to see how much corruption there was in the South Korean election, and I have never changed my mind since then. You have evidence all over the place. You have documentary evidence, you have video evidence, you have physical evidence in the machines, you have eyewitness testimony is available to be examined. You have scientific evidence as well. One example, it's been alleged that the statistical outcomes of the South Korean elections demonstrate illegality. Well, the former head of South Korea's equivalent of MIT told me that, look, I tried to figure this out, and either God did it or it's rigged. And that is compelling evidence. And the evidence is there. Now, in the years that I've been looking at this, how many times has the evidence been reviewed by the media, South Korean or foreign, by the National Election Commission, by the South Korean courts? I think you know the answer, none. I'll stay here for the next 6 months if somebody can show me anyone who has looked at this evidence. Instead, what you hear is, it's baseless, it's conspiracy theories. Well, then you ask, well, did you look at the evidence? No, it's baseless, it's conspiracy theories. Well, did you look at the evidence? No. Well, this is a point at which this sort of thing just becomes either just criminal activity or just unbelievably stupid. And that's what we have seen here. So as I said, that is the answer to all of this. When someone says, oh, it's baseless, these people are making up things. Well, show me a report, show me an examination of this evidence. It's all there to be examined, and nobody ever does. Well, that tells you plenty. Now, what's at stake here? Ultimately, South Korea as a good ally of the United States. We take it for granted. You always hear it's an ironclad relationship, forged in the blood of the Korean War. The Koreans love us, never been stronger. You will hear that from all parts of the U.S. government and elsewhere. Well, they used to say that about Venezuela before Chavez came. It was very strongly tied to the Americans. You had a military relationship. It was the hemisphere's oldest democracy, short of us. And it was just perfectly strong. And then look what happened after Chavez came. In a very short time, suddenly Venezuela is pro-Cuba, as anti-America as you can get. Is there some reason that can't happen with South Korea? No. And what you're seeing in the manipulation of the electoral process in South Korea is an effort by hardcore South Korean leftist radicals to turn South Korea into a one-party state that is aligned with the Chinese Communist Party, aligned with North Korea, and they want to break the U.S.-South Korean relationship. That's what they want. Most people don't want it, but we've seen many cases where a ruthless group of committed radicals can move a country where most people want to go. We'll saw something similar in Turkey. Specifics vary, but Turkey is not what it was 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, and you wonder if it's even an ally. And that is what's at stake. Yet, what all you hear is ironclad relationships, never been stronger. Well, I wouldn't bet on that. And the elections are just one tool that the leftists are using in order to take over control and move South Korea away from consensual government, away from democracy. Because they have taken over now the presidency, the National Assembly, they have an overwhelming control, gotten by electoral fraud. They have the labor unions, academia, the media has been emasculated. I wouldn't even think of looking into this. The court system they've never examined any of the electoral fraud because they're afraid. You have as well big business. They're trying to get their claws into that. The South Korean military has even been put on notice. The last piece of the puzzle was the presidency. And the evidence speaks for itself. And as I said, this was a huge surprise to me to find out what was going on with South Korean elections. And I think we need to take this very seriously. Now, what can your members do, the representatives? Well, one, you can help them, just tell them something's going on here. And write letters, speak up, hold hearings. And often some interest from the United States makes a huge it has a huge sort of benefit for the people who are trying to defend freedom in South Korea. So the first thing you got to do is remember that thing that I just said. When someone tells you, "Oh, this is conspiracy theories," show me the review of the evidence that's been done. It doesn't exist. So thank you very much for coming. And I really can't overstate just how serious this is. And as I said, it was a huge surprise to me. But it was, if I wasn't an adult, I'd probably cry to see what's happened in South Korea. Thank you.
We're honored to have from South Korea former Assemblyman Min, who was also the news anchor for the biggest Korean media outlet, KBS, for over 20 years. He is intelligent, talented, brave. He was the first to really step up and step out in regards to what is going on in regards to election fraud in South Korea, and he experienced it himself. And so we are glad to welcome Assemblyman Min to come and share with us.
박주현 변호사님인가? 민경 의원이네. 네.
Thank you, Mr. Tan, for kind introduction. Good afternoon. My name is Kyung Min. I was one of the very first people to say loud and clear that South Korea's 2020 general election was rigged. I worked for 23 years at KBS, Korea's largest broadcaster. 3 of those years I spent right here in Washington as a foreign correspondent. As a trained reporter, I saw what others missed: statistical evidence that was too clear to ignore. That evidence turned me into a fighter. For 5 years, I've led a movement traveling between Korea and the US to expose the truth and defend democracy. In 2020, I was a candidate for the 21st Korean general election. I wasn't just any candidate. I had served as a presidential spokesperson, a member of parliament, and the anchor of Korea's primetime news. I was confident I would win, but I lost. Why? Because the early vote and the election day vote didn't match. They violated the law of large numbers, a basic rule in statistics that ensures predictable results in big samples. These patterns didn't stop in 2020. They continued into the most recent presidential election. The numbers do not lie. What surprises me the most is how little outrage we've seen from the Korean people. A people known for intelligence, talent, and courage. Have we grown numb? Have we been conditioned to believe this is the new normal? But there is no new normal in math. There is only the truth. As you heard earlier, our last presidential election was also fraudulent. It was manipulated. Just like President Trump's victory was stolen 4 years ago, so was ours. And just like Americans fought to take it back, we are fighting too. But there's one key difference. In Korea, the rightful winner, Mr. Kim Moon-soo, conceded far too quickly. He gave up even before the counting was done. Maybe he couldn't believe it had been stolen. I've paid a heavy price for speaking up. The political left sued me. The media mocked me, called me crazy, called me a conspiracy theorist. Even fellow conservatives began to avoid me. Lifelong friends turned their backs. Only my family stayed with me, and they suffered for it too. Mr. Kim Moon-soo saw what I went through. Maybe that's why he hesitates to join us, and I understand that. But I still urge him, reconsider. Election fraud is a crime. It destroys democracy. Accepting it encourages more of it. This is not just for just your fight, Mr. Kim. It's the people's fight. It's about every citizen's right to vote. So, please, withdraw your concession and join us. In 2020, I flew to Washington to speak the truth. At that time, I stood alone. My words felt like a cry in the wild wilderness, but I still spoke. I even warned America, be aware or be next. And I was right. It took President Trump 4 years, but he's back. Today, I return to Washington, but I'm not alone. I stand with President Trump, President Yoon Suk-yeol of Korea, and former Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-hwan. I stand with Ambassador Dorstan, Colonel John Mills, Colonel Brad Newsham, and Professor Bradley Thayer. History will remember them. In Korea, many patriots are fighting with me. Their courage brought us here, and I'm especially moved by the young people in their 20s and 30s who are now standing up. They give me hope. But we must not forget those we lost. Over the last 5 years, 5 great souls gave their lives in this fight. Kim Il-du, Kim Hwang-chan, Kim Jae-hong, Pastor Kim Tae-won, and Elder Kwon Tae-hun. 2 died from illness while leading the movement. 1 died in a suspicious car crash. 2 set themselves on fire after exposing the truth. Let us never forget them. We are here because of them. Now, I speak directly to President Trump. America has spent hundreds of billions of dollars in Ukraine. But is Korea less important? Do we need bullets and bombs to recognize that a war is happening? China has taken control of Korea's government without firing a single shot. Can't we see this? President Lee Jae-myung didn't win by chance. This was a long strategy by the global communist movement. And now, as a puppet of Beijing, he will sell out Korean sovereignty. 4 days ago, on June 25th, was the 75th anniversary of the Korean War. 36,000 Americans died to protect Korea's freedom. That freedom is now slipping away. President Trump, you know what election fraud looks like. Now it's happening to your allies. Please act, and act soon. And to Congress, don't see this as just a Korean problem. This is a global crisis. Hold hearings. Investigate the Chinese influence that threatens both of our nations. 5 years ago, I received a calling from God to expose this fraud. That calling set me into this long, hard fight, and I've never turned back. Under God's providence, may every effort to uncover the truth be blessed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblyman Min. We have also from South Korea the attorney, and I say the attorney because he has been the attorney leading this fight in the legal front. In fact, he has an active case right now seeking to overturn this election that should be overturned, should be nullified, and should be reversed. And so please welcome with me Attorney Park.
Thank you. It's my great honor to be here with you. I'm Geopolitical Power. Every moment is instrument for me and for Korea. Recently, North Korea discharged its nuclear waste without permission. But Lee Jae-myung, pro-China and pro-North Korea, fake president stolen the presidency by election fraud, did not take the issue of this matter. They make a neighbor raise the map of these matters. This is very ridiculous and very dangerous. China sought to turn South Korea into its vassal state by fostering a large number of pro-China politicians, bureaucrats, and legal professionals. Through bribes, women, and intimidation, they expanded their influence. By establishing pro-China human networks, they took control of the National Election Commission and attempted to swallow the entire nation through large-scale election fraud. As a result, South Korea's National Assembly and the presidency are now dominated by China forces. Xi Jinping and Wang Huning of China have continuously studied the electoral system of Taiwan and neighboring countries in order to turn them into pro-China states, and they have established such legend through fraudulent relation. What China calls One Belt and One Road initiative is, in fact, a roadmap of building pro-China states through election fraud. In the case of South Korea, the NEC's electoral system password was 12345, which is the customer service number for China Civil Service call center. This shows just how much control China has over South Korea's NEC, to the extent that China's administrative system number was used as the NEC's password. South Korea's largest telecom company, SKT, was hacked by Chinese hackers, resulting in the personal information of 27 million people, over half of South Korea's population, being handed over to China. This data has been used to forge IDs and hack the electoral system, helping to establish for China's regime. The NEC posted a 10-episode documentary series titled Democracy and Leadership. Strangely, despite China not being a democracy, 6 of 10 episodes focused on Chinese political figures such as Wang Huning, Deng Xiaoping, and Zhou Enlai, with Wang Huning featured in both the first and second episode, even though it's not popular. This indirectly shows Wang Huning's central role. Not only Australia and New Zealand, but also in Pacific Islands like Western Samoa and Papua New Guinea, election fraud is occurring and pro-China states are being established. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has even toured these Pacific Island nations, maybe aiming to strike at the level of the U.S. stamp fleet in preparation for a potential U.S.-China conflict. Election fraud is not just a problem of South Korea. It's also an issue for the United States and the entire world. If we do not work together to eliminate it, creeping communism may one day threaten nations and endanger the entire world. Let the United States join South Korea in eradicating election fraud. South Korea could serve as an excellent testing ground, test bed for eradicating.
박주현 변호사가 제가 어제
I
했던 말 하나요.
understand that the United States
한국 시험장이라고.
also faces difficulty in figuring out how to tackle election fraud. Supporting efforts to eliminate pejorative election processes in South Korea, drive out pro-China elements, and distance the nation from China's interference would be of significant help. More than 80% of South Koreans dislike China, and over 90% favor the United States. Let us work together to further strengthen the South Korea-US alliance and the international coalition for freedom and democracy. God bless Korea and the United States. Thank
So before we hit the question and answer time, I just want to mention one more thing. I had a chance to interview Secretary Pompeo about the first Trump administration, and he noted in that interview one of the failures of our time in the first Trump administration. And that failure was allowing Hong Kong to be encoiled and crushed by the Chinese Communist Party. We do not need Hong Kong 2.0 here. It is time for decisive action to be taken in regards to what is happening in South Korea with the implications for the United States, the region, and the world. And with that, I'll turn it over to Henry as we have a question and answer time.
We'll give priority to congressional staffers, so please state your name and which office you're from. And if we don't have any hands up from the staffers, then we'll go with the
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for speaking. Dr. Terry, this one is for you. I understand that you said that the NEC is not audits.
여러분 지금이 진짜 중요한 장면이다.
And I guess the question that sprung to my mind was, what's in it for them? Are these officials making money out of this? Are they the ones who are pushing who they want in office? I guess I'm just sort of confused as to what they get out of it.
Well, certainly, thank you very much indeed for the question, and certainly that is an excellent one. What the NEC gets out of it is control, of course. By being completely opaque, no one can identify tracer methods, and there is no accountability. They're able to, perhaps working with other actors like the CCP, ensure that their favorite candidate wins the election. And so as we have stressed today, this is the source of a great problem that we face in the South Korean election, and that alone causes us to recognize that this election cannot be seen as a legitimate one if there is no transparency. Thank you.
If I might, I'd like to add to that. It is a family business. So you have a large percentage of NEC coming from the relatives of a family. And it's also a sinecure. They don't have to do much of anything except manipulate a few elections when they occur. So in their hiring, they have passed over more qualified candidates in order to bring in family members to keep the family secrets, right? And to not spill the beans of what is going on. Picking who they want to be in power is pretty powerful, right? And when there were about 31 impeachments that were trying to prevent people from looking into it, maybe that was...
아, 왜 대체 안 하냐고 물어본 것 같습니다, 방금. 그래서 왜 대처가 왜 안 되는지 지금 설명하고 있어요, 모스탄 대사가.
South Korean government, who wins all the time? It's the NEC people. Why? They've got tons of time to practice their badminton skills and whatever else they're competing in. So it's a sinecure, it's a family racket, and it is a criminal fraud organization.
I'll just add one bit that you wouldn't know if you don't follow this closely. They're also incredibly vindictive and vicious. If you even say, for example, the way candidate, former Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn said, we want to have an honest election this time, you will have the police show up at your door. You will have charges brought against you. They file cases all the time against anyone who simply says something as innocuous as, how about a free election? If you raise charges, make claims, you can stand by and you will be on the receiving end of their punishment. And I think we've got a couple of people in this room who have done that. And this is more, I think, than just trying to cover up incompetence. I believe there is, in fact, they are playing an intentional role in, as I said, turning South Korea into a one-party state. It's the vindictiveness and viciousness that we really have to remember, and it takes a lot of nerve in South Korea to stand up for freedom.
Anyone else have questions?
Just one quick point of order with the National Election Commission. The Chief Justice for the Constitutional Court also sits on the board of the National.
아, 그리고 선관위 출신들이 헌법재판소에도 앉아 있다. 그거 설명하고 있어요.
You have the Constitutional Court.
존 밀스 대령이.
That's like the Chief Justice of the American Supreme Court sitting on the body of some kind of semi-executive branch entity thingy. And this just doesn't make any sense.
그리고 이건 말도 안 된다. 그런 놈들이 어떻게 판결 똑바로 하냐.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'm Janira Ruby, State Department Fellow, advising some of the members on HVAC. Thank you for your time to the panelists. And I guess my question is, what are we to make of the? I know we mentioned a lot of Trump, the first Trump administration, but Trump administration 2.0. Some of the reactions to this. I know you've laid out what you assess to be, a preponderance of evidence regarding even the most recent election. What do you make of the administration's response and kind of the muted reaction to this? Curious to that. And this is addressed in the whole panel.
그런데 왜 트럼프 2.0 정부는 이에 대한 반응이 없냐라고 묻는 것 같습니다.
The response has been a little muted, however, the normal congratulations also, there was one sentence, was followed by a second sentence that said, and we are gravely concerned with Chinese interference, which was explosive. In diplomatic terms, that was dramatic departure from the norm. So that was a clearly telegraphed message from the Trump administration on their view of this election.
I believe the statement from the White House, given within 48 hours, congratulated Lee Jae-myung for his election and also declared it was free and fair. Now, to do that within 48 hours takes an awful lot. As I said, nobody's ever looked into the evidence. That was
그래서 저 사람들이 그래도 축사 똑바로 안 했다. 48시간 동안 아무 대답도 안 하고 평가도 안 했다. 그것이 트럼프가 간접적으로 반응한 방식이다 라는 걸 설명하고 있는 것 같습니다.
actually take an interest in this. You know, we spend $100 billion on our intelligence budget. You think they could review the evidence with a little bit of that cash. But also speak up, you know, on the importance of a free election. You just simply have to just a general statement will make a difference. And it gives some oxygen to the good guys, and it puts the bad guys on notice that maybe somebody's watching them. And it's not hard to figure out who the problematic individuals are in South Korea. And there's things that we can do. I'm going to say maybe visas are, you know, it's not so easy to get into the United States, even just exposing some of the things we know. But I must say the response has been more muted than one would like. But as I said, keep in mind Venezuela and Turkey. If someone had spoken up in the early days there, might not have gotten into the positions that they are.
I very much believe that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. And there could have been things we ruefully note that could have been done, even public diplomacy, prior to the election that could have made a big difference. But even now, and even at this point, there are actions that can be taken if there's a will to do it. I will note that there is an understaffed administration right now who is spread thin and is dealing with kinetic hot wars around the world. But that does not make the gray zone war here, the hybrid warfare here, the taking over of South Korea any less important. In fact, we heard something curious. We heard that the State Department was prioritizing things in Northeast Asia that were important. One would think that this would qualify under both those points. And we would strongly urge Congress, strongly urge the executive branch to take some decisive actions before it is too late. You don't want to just try to lock the barn after the horse has been stolen. You want to be able to address.
모스탄이 너무 늦기 전에 행동하라고 강조했다고 하네요.
And so, can we step in and can we decisively take actions that demonstrate our treaty commitment fulfillment? Because you have triggering events here of cyber attacks that require, let me underscore that, require response by the United States of America to address it.
There's also congressional response as well that might be useful. If USAID did give money to AWEB and to the NEC, and Chairman Comer, for example, has grounds to investigate along those lines. So the administration's response, of course, but there's a congressional response too, which I think might be very helpful.
USAID가 선관이랑 AOF한테 돈 준 거에 대해서 말했나요?
The 2020 U.S. election was brought up several times in this presentation, and I know there was a lot of different perspectives and opinions on what happened in that election from both sides of the aisle, both then and now. So I was just wondering, what's the general public's opinion or perspective in South Korea on this past election?
Benjamin Min, do you want, I'm sorry, Assemblyman Min, do you want to address that?
I don't want to make any stupid mistakes, so I'll speak in Korean. Somebody can translate, I think. 네. 처음에는 다 음모론이라고 이제 생각을 했고요. 그것이 이제 왜 그러냐 하면 지금 이 시대에 무슨 부정선거가 있을 수 있느냐. 부정선거는 60년 전에 있었던 막걸리를 사주고 고무신을 사주고 표를 사는 그런 매표 행위로 생각을 했기 때문에 사람들이 이제 듣질 않았습니다. 그런데 5년 동안 저희들이 싸움을 해왔고 특히 최근에는 미국에도 부정선거와 관련된 트럼프 대통령의 싸움이 있었고 결국 윤석열 대통령도 부정선거 이 실태를 바로잡기 위해서 그 비상계엄령까지 선포했다가 결국은 탄핵을 당했습니다. 그걸로 인해서 지금 많은 사람들이 부정선거의 실태에 대해서 알게 됐고, 특히 20, 30대 젊은이들이 이 문제에 대해서 많이 깨어났습니다. 그 상징적인 두 가지 장면만 보라고 한다면, 국제조사단, 감시단이 입국을 할 때 그 기다리던 젊은이들, 한 1000여 명의 젊은이들이 3시간 동안 이분들을 기다리면서 Stop the Steal을 찬팅, 그 소리를 지르고 했습니다. 다음에 26일 날 워싱턴 내셔널 프레스 클럽에서 부정선거와 관련된 기자회견이 있었을 때 한국 서울역에는 수천 명의 젊은이들이 중심이 된 시위대가 무려 6시간 동안 새벽 3시임에도 불구하고 그 생방송으로 기자회견을 지켜봤습니다. 그래서 더 많은 사람들이 깨어나고 있는데 이 부정선거를 저지른 사람들은 강력한 그 카르텔을 이루고 있기 때문에 그 성을 무너뜨리는 것은 쉽지 않습니다. 다시 말씀드리지만 그래도 전에 비해서는 많은 사람들이 부정선거 문제에 대해서 깨어나고 있다고 말씀드릴 수 있습니다.
So first, when we started talking about election fraud, everybody would call us conspiracy theorists, and the fight was not easy. But we have been fighting for the past 5 years, and more recently, there was also President Trump's battle in the United States regarding election fraud. In the end, President Yoon Suk-yeol even declared martial law in an attempt to rectify the reality of election fraud, but he was ultimately impeached. As a result, many people have become aware of the extent of election fraud, and in particular, many young people in their 20s and 30s have awakened to this issue. And one of the symbolic events to this is when the international monitoring team entered South Korea 3 weeks ago to monitor the snap election in South Korea. They were welcomed by thousands of people in their 20s and 30s chanting, "Stop the steal, stop the steal." And then on the 26th, when a press conference on election fraud, just the 26th of this month, was held at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., thousands of protesters, mostly young people, gathered at Seoul Station in South Korea. Despite it being 3 a.m., they watched the press conference live for a full
번역
6
중입니다.
hours.
민경훈
As a
님 방금 한
result,
말.
more and more people are waking up to the
번역이란데
truth.
통역.
However, those who orchestrated the election fraud form a powerful cartel, and breaking down that stronghold is not easy. That said, compared to before, we can definitely say that many more people are now awakened to the issue of election fraud in South Korea.
If I heard correctly what Assemblyman Min told me personally, I think he said it might be around 40% of the population that is recognizing election fraud, but moving up, maybe moving more towards 50 or 60% of late and recently.
I'd also point out that the state of development of South Korean media is essentially where America was maybe 30 years ago. There really wasn't any alternative. There was just kind of a mainstream, and that was it. Fox wasn't even a thing 30 years ago. So that's the challenge, is we're dealing with a society that does not have alternative media. Now, in America, things have radically changed. Some would assert that had a lot to do with the 2024 election. Podcasters, alternative media. It has changed in America. South Korea is still 30 years ago. What is extremely distressing is we have American companies such as Google, which owns YouTube, and we also have X, unfortunately, that appears to be silencing and censoring social media inside of South Korea. And I've actually contacted X, the X office of South Korea, to get their comment on this. They've not responded yet. I'll move on to the American office and the front office of X, but also YouTube, which is powerful in in South Korea, but is being silenced and suppressed, like Ground C is being silenced and suppressed. And this is another avenue for congressional investigation. We can't have the South Korean corporations of U.S. media silencing and censoring. That's what's going on.
Okay, we'll take one last question.
Can I give Attorney Park a chance to add to this before we? Yeah.
그 한국의 그 부정선거에 대해서 말한 사람이 대통령, 국무총리, 그리고 국방부 장관, 국정원장 이런 권위 있는 사람들이 모두 부정선거를 얘기를 하고 있습니다. 그런데 이 부정선거 카르텔은 이 확산되는 것을 막고 있습니다. 그들의 전략은 무관심 전략입니다. 그래서 6월 26일 날 워싱턴 내셔널 클럽에서 기자회견이 있었음에도 불구하고 한국의 주류 언론은 다루지 않았고 철저히 이를 은폐하려고 하고 있습니다. 그러나 진실의 힘은 크고 진실이 점점 더 확산될 것이라고 저는 확신을 하고 있고 이렇게 미국과 함께 그리고 미국이 도와준다면 이 진실의 확장력을 막을 수 없다고 생각을 하고 아마 이제 진실이 페이크 프레지던트를 나가라 할 수 있을 거라고 생각합니다.
Regarding the election fraud in South Korea, many high-ranking officials, including the president, or prime minister, the minister of national defense, and the director of the National Intelligence Service, are all aware of the fraudulent election. However, the election fraud cartel is actively working to prevent this issue from spreading. Their main strategy is one of indifference. So even though there was a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on June 26th, it was not covered by the mainstream media in South Korea, but I believe the truth is powerful. Truth has so much power, and if the U.S. is willing to help, we can make history. Thank you.
So we'll take one last question, and after that, we'll have final wrap-up comments from Ambassador Tan. And for those that have stayed, we could, chat a little bit, a few minutes after the event is over. So one last question from anyone in the crowd. If not, we'll give more time for the ambassador to make comments. No more questions? Okay.
One of the things that I have become more convinced of the more I've traveled around the world is most of the world wants more of America. Let me say that simple statement again, but it's very important. Most of the world wants more of America. And let me tell you, South Korea wants a ton more of America. You should have heard the passion and the energy and also the desperation and the fear of how people in South Korea want the U.S. to step in, want the U.S. to be involved. South Korea was modeled after the United States. It is the linchpin ally of the United States there in that region, arguably in the world. And so for the U.S. to be inert, for the U.S. to be uninvolved, for the U.S. to not really actively step in here would be a terrible tragedy to allow our close ally, Korea, to fall into hands that we should not want it to fall into. The persecution is already happening in the current administration and is even extended to U.S. citizens. That U.S. citizens who are sharing Bibles and basic necessities, food and other things like that to North Korea were arrested by this administration. But you also have lawfare being conducted against former Prime Minister Hwang. You have a church, a large church, Pastor Sun, whose office in his church in South Korea was raided. This was the first time in South Korean history that any such thing has happened. People are being brought for interrogation to police stations. There is an attempt to intimidate and silence and squash not only those who are calling for election integrity, but also just people who are trying to exercise their basic constitutional rights that should be upheld in a constitutional democracy. And this is a time where either history could be made in turning that whole region around, because there are vulnerabilities in China and with the Chinese Communist Party right now. There are vulnerabilities in regards to North Korea right now. And in the midst of this crisis, there could be a turning of this whole region that could make history. Or we can sit back and talk to our grandchildren in the future about how the US lost this region and lost the great power struggle with the CCP and failed with our closest ally, South Korea, in this critical region that has implications for not only that region, but for the world. And so let me encourage you, the US, we have, and our government has, a lot of resources, a lot of abilities at our disposal, if we are willing to utilize them. And if we remain inert, if we remain complacent, if we remain quiet, if we do not act, the stakes are very high. And I pray that we will, that many times this country has, and I pray that this country again will step in at this historic time in this critical region to turn South Korea around, to bring about a unification of the Korean Peninsula that would be aligned with the United States. The Chinese Communist Party greatly fears that.
코스모스님 무슨
Have our
말씀이시죠?
ally available to be able to defend Taiwan, which there are now rehearsals for the Chinese to take over Taiwan. And rather than regret later, now is the time to act. Now is the time to step up. And I would encourage you to convey to your members of our Congress
그거 안 되려고 지금 무스탄이 설명 중이잖아요.
action to deal with the situation. Thank you so much.
Let's do another big round of applause for panelists.
코스모스님 왜요?
We will follow up with you with more reports and other documents and other materials throughout the summer into the fall. So thank you once again, and this now concludes the congressional briefing. Thank you very much.
We have a short clip, about 10 minutes. If you have time, you can stay here to watch the final clip, because we have a lot of time. But I want to use the movie clip. It shows clear evidence of the election fraud.
일단 질문은 좀 공격적이었는데요. 너네 그 5년 전에 알았다며. 근데 너네 뭐 했냐? 뭐 이런 식으로 질문하긴 하더라고.
If you are able to stay, then you can stay and watch the film. But if you have to go, then you're more than welcome to. So thank you very much.
어떤 말씀이요? 코스모스님? 뭐 Q&A 시간 가졌던 것 같은데? 갑자기 주어 없이 그렇게 말씀하시면 제가 답변 드리기가 곤란합니다. 주어를 말씀해 주셔야 제가 의도를 명확히 해야죠. 답이 없다는 게 이 나라입니까? 아니면 지금 저기 의회 사람들입니까? 일단 에? 무슨 말씀이시죠? 이렇게까지 당연히 해야 되는 거 아닌가요? 혹시 잡하세요? 아니 코스모스님 공만 혹시 잡하세요? 뭐 독재된다는 게 설마 이재명 실각하고 그 다시아에서 우파 정권 설립하면 그게 독재란 소리예요? 저 이해가 안 되거든요. 주어를 빼먹으면 이런 오해가 생겨요. 좀 명확히 해주시면 좋겠는데.
We're switching ballot boxes. The Supreme Court.
또 다른 영상이네.
The following are the scenarios of election fraud that ordinary Korean people have uncovered on their own. The Democratic Party creates an election blueprint. From this blueprint, they run simulation software programmed on the National Election Commission server to inflate the vote count. The vote count is inflated through several methods such as manipulating electronic counting machines, inserting fake ballots, or switching ballot boxes. The Supreme Court covers up these crimes by nullifying the recount. Of course, this hypothesis cannot be confirmed until the investigative agency forensically examines the National Election Commission servers and computer.
아, 빨갱이구나. 당연하지. 비상점포 했어야지. 근데 저 지경인데 비상점포를 안 해? 너 병신 새끼야? 시국 똑바로 봐. 그리고 네가 왜 여기서 설치인데 지금 너 꺼져. 어디 미정계 링크 타고 온 거 같은데 어이가 없네. 솔직히 말해줄까? 이재명이 독재지 윤 정부가 독재냐? 왜냐고? 너네 부정선거로 국회를 강탈했기 때문이야. 그리고 국회는 어마어마하게 중요한 기관이지. 근데 그런 걸 감히 부정선거로 탈지? 이런 거는 전국을 뒤집어서라도 바로 잡아내는 게 맞는 거야, 병신아. 그리고 그런 혁명이 일어났잖아. 그게 4.19요. 4.19 때 탱크가 청와대로 진격한 거 알고 있냐? 너네 부정선거 했으니까 나가라잖아. 그럼 그 군인들이 계엄군이냐? 아, 계엄군 맞지? 근데 다른 의미의 계엄군이었지. 이 씨발 부정선거를 그렇게 처해놓고서 뭔 독재 타령을 하고 있어. 짭게 수고 새끼들이 짭게 주고들이 아주 그냥. 조용히 하고 지켜놔봐 병신아.
In an article in the Donga Ilbo, the Democratic Party said it was aiming for an overall voter turnout of 71.3%.
영포티 새끼들 아주 가관이야. 아 물론 제 구독자들 말하는 거 아닙니다. 당연히 좌파 영포티 말하는 거 알죠? 코스모스 니 보나마나 영포티 아니야. 그래 안 그래? 니가 2030인데 좌파는 존나 답이 없는 거고.
The predicted voter turnout and the manipulation value. The number of early votes is inflated and distributed to each.
카메라님 어서 오세요. 일찍 일어나셨구나.
And the National Election Commission announced fake vote numbers, claiming they were the election results.
병신아, 애초에 휴대폰으로 보는 짓에 뭔 냄새가 나. 그리고 네가 내 방에 쳐들어와 놓고서 뭔 냄새가 난데 안 꺼져 개새끼야? 씨발 남의 담방에 와서 입을 다물래. 올테이가 없는 새끼네? 아 이래서 좌파라는 거구나. 하도 사고방식부터가 병신이니까. 중이 싫으면 저리 싫으면 중이 떠나야지. 장난하나.
The other minor parties represented by the bars in the middle means their votes were not part of the manipulation.
왜 쫄리냐? 우리는 제명이 끌어내릴 거야 올해 안에. 그게 우리 플랜 A야. 플랜 B는 내년이고.
The result of the 2020 general election reported by the NEC is not possible in a real.
어디 한번 미국도 막아봐 너네.
Professor Huss said the likelihood of achieving a result like this with tens of millions of real-life voters is equivalent to tossing 253 coins in the air and having them all turn up heads. This graph shows the results of the recent presidential election in which Lee Jae-myung was elected. Red shows the districts won by the conservative candidate Kim, and blue shows the districts won by Lee Jae-myung. In many cases, the conservative candidate won in the election day vote, but as you can see in the early vote, the results were overturned in favor of Lee Jae-myung. Had the early vote not been manipulated, this would have been virtually impossible to achieve. In the 2020 general election, many observers reported seeing the conservative candidate winning in the election day vote. But then the results reversed as early vote ballot boxes began to open late at night. You may remember the incident during the 2020 U.S. presidential election when Donald Trump was winning in all the swing states until midnight. But when the mail-in ballot boxes that arrived early the next morning were opened, a flood of votes for Biden poured in, overturning the election.
아 진짜 좌파 새끼들 씨 채팅도 똑바로 못 치고 답답해 죽겠어.
is clear evidence of rigging, as it was in many constituencies.
하긴 그 채팅도 똑바로 못 치는 새끼들이 정치를 어떻게 알아? 저런 새끼들은 그냥 투표권 주면 안 되는데 원래.
Is exactly the same as the one for the
하도
2022
명식이라.
presidential election 3 years ago. It is quite possible that the same computer program was used to manipulate the early voting this time as well. The question now is, how did they actually implement the vote fraud? The simulated results are manipulated at the counting site using electronic counting machines. These are hundreds of ballots from one constituency going through a counting machine. Ordinarily, the ballots should appear in random order. But you can see that they are all marked for the Democratic Party candidate.
그것도 맞는데 배급 받기 전에 우리 젠파파 떨어질까봐 그런 거예요. 그냥 저 새끼들 무의식적으로 아는 거예요. 본능적으로. 아이 이거 만약에 제대로 먹히면 젠파파가 물러나야 될 수도 있겠구나. 그러니까 꼭 이렇게까지만 해야 됩니까? 유유유 이지랄하는 거지.
Of the over 100,000 votes counted at that time, more than 90% were for Biden, and similar phenomena that occurred in Korea and the U.S., which defy the basic laws of statistics.
좌파 새끼들 무관심 반쪽하는데 존나 관심 많어. 오죽하면 저 것처럼 학고 채널에 들어와.
Fake paper ballots were made and inserted into the ballot boxes.
그러게요, 가만히.
This counting clerk separating paper ballots that are stuck together. Why are they stuck together when each ballot is cast separately? The NEC gives a nonsense explanation that the ballots stuck together by static electricity. And this, bundles of votes that look like they just came out from the mill. How is that possible for votes that go through many hands? The NEC made the ridiculous excuse that the ballots were made of special paper that could be reverted to their original state. So voters folded the ballots and put them in the ballot box, which resulted in the stiff ballots. The National Election Commission's voting manual has a clause that says, cover all CCTVs if installed in the voting locations, which makes it impossible to check the number of early voters or any other illegal activity, such as multiple voting or proxy voting around the voting locations. 9 months before the 2020 general election, the head of the Democratic Party's research think tank, Yang Zhongchol, paid a 4-day visit to China, where he met with high-ranking members of the Chinese Communist Party and flew to Shenzhen to visit the world-famous tech company, Tencent. And not only that, an accountant named Roy Kim discovered the Chinese Communist Party slogan, "Follow the Party," programmed and hidden in the ASCII code in the 2020 general election data announced by the NEC. He discovered the algorithm which the programmer used to plant these hidden codes in the NEC data. And the NEC doesn't just stop at manipulating votes, it also controls the opinion polls, which is used to convince the public to accept fraudulent election results. This QR code contains identifying codes for each voter. When the ballot goes through the electronic counting machine, the voter's personal information, as well as who that person voted for, is input into the NEC's computer database. Now the NEC has access to this information, which is unconstitutional, and then supplies this information to opinion poll companies, leading to suspicions that the NEC has been interfering with public opinion polls. Despite the fact that the overwhelming evidence of election fraud emerged in the recount, the Supreme Court justices dismissed the lawsuit without even properly verifying it. The responsibility for the collapse of democracy in South Korea lies largely with corrupt judges who are destroying the rule of law. The fraudulent election in South Korea is not just a domestic problem. It is a treason committed by South Korean leftists under the influence of North Korea and China. Furthermore, there are growing allegations that AWEB, which is funded by USAID, has been organizing election fraud in multiple countries worldwide. This organized crime of the global left seeks to undermine the alliance between South Korea, the United States, and other allies. We Koreans earnestly request that the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives take an interest in this issue and help restore South Korea's democratic integrity.
Thank you very much. This concludes today's event. Thank you. 오늘 끝났습니다. 끝나고 말씀 좀 하도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. 스타트 스테이. 꼭 켤게요. 조현민 선수 인곡 초청을 해서. 네네네. 선생님 오셨네요. 감사합니다.
네, 여러분 끝났습니다. 여기까지고요. 여러분들 어떠셨어요? 흥미롭게 잘 보셨나요? 물론 중간에 와이파이가 불안정해가지고 집중력 끊겨가지고 더 이상 통역을 그만두긴 했는데, 그래도 일단 내용은 저번 서울역에서 봤던 기자회견이 비슷합니다, 여러분. 다만 질문 같은 거는 흥미로운 질문이 있었다면, 미국 의회 보좌진 측에서 너네 그 많은 시간 동안 뭐 했냐? 우리는 이렇게 극복했는데 너네는 왜 문제 해결하지 못했냐? 라고 하니까 민경 의원이랑 무스탄이 설명을 추가로 해줌으로써 일단 중국의 영향력이 너무너무 세고 카르텔이 너무 강력하다. 그래서 이것이 쉽게 부술 수가 없다. 이런 식으로 답변을 한 것으로 기억됩니다. 즉 한마디로 말해서 미국 의회는 윤석열 정부 재임 동안 너네 왜 이 제도 못 바꿨냐 이거예요. 근데 선관위라는 조직이 감히 정부도 건드릴 수 없을 만큼 강력한 조직이기 때문에 이게 쉽지 않다라는 것을 친절하게 설명하는 그런 기자회견이었습니다. 그리고 오늘 기자회견 통해서 미국 의회, 미국 정치인들의 생각을 알 수 있죠. 야, 한국 너네 좀 한심하다. 약간 이런 시선이 있는 것 같아요. 그 시선과 오해를 잘 풀어주기를 바랍니다. 물론 미국 정치인들의 시선이 일부는 맞아요. 솔직히 한심하죠. 이게 하루 이틀 일도 아니고 몇 년 전부터 다 충분히 인지했던 문제인데, 그리고 우리가 대통령 자리도 갖고 있었는데 이렇게 당했다는 것은 솔직히 부끄러운 일이 맞습니다. 하지만 그럼에도 불구하고 모스탄 대사는 그렇다고 해서 한국을 무시하면 누가 미국을 믿겠냐? 가장 최우방국인 영국과 더불어서 최우방국인 한국을 이렇게 외면하면 우리가 무엇을 할 수 있겠냐? 그것도 이렇게 엄중하고 중요한 시기에 말이야. 이런 식으로 친절히 답변해서 충분히 미국 정치인들을 논리적으로 잘 설득한 것으로 보입니다. 시청자 여러분들 시청해주셔서 감사하고요. 이 영상 지인분들에게 많이 퍼뜨려주세요. 커뮤니티 같은 경우는 이미 알아서 퍼질 예정이기 때문에 굳이 커뮤니티에는 올려주지 않으셔도 됩니다. 시청해주셔서 감사합니다. 이상 리버튜브였고, 여러분들 잠 못 주무신 분들은 조금이라도 눈 붙이시고요. 그럼 저는 이만 방종을 하도록 하겠습니다. 수고하셨습니다. 멸공.